This book, Ultimate Goal, is written by Vikram Sood. So it's a very captivating analysis of how nations construct narratives about themselves, which they consciously promote to enhance their own interests. Right or wrong is not the question. The question is how the methodology, or how nations, or how like individuals, they promote their self interest in a manner, sometimes brazenly, sometimes subtly, uh, with a certain narrative in mind. So Vikram Sood has, in a very captivating and very interesting, he has used very interesting, I would not say arguments, he has used the factual analysis uh, of immediate and current events which have been there, or which are there in the contemporary affairs of international politics or international affairs. How he weaves a tapestry analysis, or a narrative behind the narrative, of how nations construct that narrative, which is in their sometimes in an enlightened self-interest, or in a very crude sense, selfish self-interest. So the background of this book, even in the words of Vikram Sood, also his primer literature, or has been Western or American, Western-led narrative, or American narrative at large. How he constructs, or tries to deconstruct that narrative, that behind the veneer of sophistication, or subtlety, or doctrine of necessity, or benevolent, or what is good for a country is good for the world at large. So all these, there's a critiquing analysis, but also, I would not say critiquing that narrative per se, but that is being supplemented and augmented by sentences, or arguments, where it is shown time and again that how the larger picture, or how the larger intervention, or Western intervention largely, has been motivated by uh, interests which supposedly are not, which might not seem cruder uh, in the first analysis, in the first appreciation. So the book has been, I'd rather say, the book is divided into various chapters, and various uh, ways, how the dominant or the powerful countries, they have been able to, in a very successful way, subvert, or manage, or convert the the rest of the world, and what I should say, marshal them, or them towards a certain perspective. So which is a deliberate maneuverability of these nations to present a conscious image of themselves for the world at large. The world at large may be, in his earlier chapters, the world at large may be the rest of the world, Asia, Pacific, African countries, and other countries included. So the riveting part of it is maybe immediate sense how in Cold War the Russia, America, Britain, all these countries have used or misused things for their good or maybe larger good or bad, you could say. So I'll just be quoting maybe some sentences which are very much which carry or sense a certain sensibility. For example, he says narratives of superiority, power, and wealth, couched in persistent innuendo and attitudes, must go. Uh, Big or small, powerful or not, a country must be able to tell its story itself. And if this is not for domination alone, it is to prevent itself from being dominated as well. And narratives are about superiority of one's own country, civilization, culture in every aspect, by implication, innuendo, or if required, quite brazenly about the inferiority of other. So even though there's a subtle dialogue that the morality of trying to construct a narrative, right or wrong, good or bad, it is defined as an end in itself, without having strings of morality attached to it. So in this book, larger level, what Vikram Sood has even somewhere here in the start, he's acknowledging this fact that the book is not about the critique of the global systems as such. It's about the more factual analysis of how facts are there and immediate reasons for those very things. So underlying construct or underlying assumption that narratives have to be constructed per se to achieve certain goals, uh, right or wrong, good or bad, moral or immoral, they are justified, and in itself that is not being critiqued. But if, as a necessary evil, nations have to survive in our time, so they have to at least create a narrative for themselves, even at minimum, if they don't want to be washed or drowned or stampeded by the force of the incoming narrative. So in principle, even if it might be a necessary evil, or it's necessary for nations or groups or to at least have a glance or maneuver narratives in a way which will be which is trying to uh, maneuver a narrative for their own self-interest or for the own survival. The survival of nations depends upon how best or better they are able to create or sustain a narrative for themselves. So there are not one narrative behind the narrative. There may be sub narratives, just like, and subplots, and there may be stories inside the stories, and the cultural, the civilizational, the historical, the social, economic, and other factors have to be factored in before how we can, what I should say, anchor or place narratives, of successful narratives. Because self narratives have, this is also the way you look at yourselves, and you also look at the world at large. In the process of creating narrative for yourself and the world will look through the narrative which you have created about yourself. That's the interesting thing that he has tried to make point again and again. And in this case, particular the case of India and the developing countries, he that they, like for example, countries like China, they have come up to this very realization way back, and the countries, and he is propounding or proposing those things for India as such. So one interesting thing is that, for example, the first chapter of it is like how to get your story right and what is a narrative, for example. So, for example, what he says, if I just quote, narratives are about advertising a superiority of ideals, cultures, and goals. Therefore, they need not necessarily be based on truth. There is a sustained overarching narrative, but there are sub narratives as well as based on the need of the time. The Western world has means to sustain its narrative of superiority and justification or righteousness of its causes through the reach of its media led by television, the wire services, and now through the control of media via internet and communication based narratives. So it's not only narratives. The role of media in sustaining or promoting a certain narrative in case of wars, in case of embedded journalism, in case of, for example, even AIDS, how a country gives aid to or playing mind games of a country against another country. It's maybe the old thing rehashed in the uh, modern sense, in the modern sense of the word. So here, the important thing which has been in this book is that how notion of American power elite, how the institutions which have been there, whether it's Council of Foreign Relations or its trilateral commission, and how these various organizations which are elite institutions where academicians, rich people, barons, politicians, so how they have been successfully, how these institutions of excellence, they have somehow been able to create a narrative not only for themselves but for also rest of the world. And rest of the world in the sense that uh, rest of the world in the sense that the things which we call narrative, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's defense, whether it's Hollywood narrative factory, how the different agencies have used not only Hollywood, not only propaganda, not only to construct narratives in a manner where, in a very curt way, in a very subtle way, they might have modeled out or they might have censored certain uglier aspects of American imperialism or American interventionism in the rest of the world. The pertinent example of being how in Indonesia maybe 1.5 million people had died after the Cold War, how the transition of Sukarno to Suharto regime, how the people did not notice it. So the selective amnesia or the selective how things are being in a very subtle way, the subtle way the narrative is being generated. For example, when he says at times the relationship of intelligence organization and media is complicated. At times the relationship is adversarial. On other equations, it is mutually dependent, where both parties manipulate each other. There are happy times when they praise one another and even support each other. The essential point is that intelligence agencies need media and the media needs intelligence agencies. And intelligence agencies manipulate parliament and the public, and the use of media to further their cause or create perception in what would be defined as larger national interests. An example of this was Iraq War or in global war on terror, many would argue. And in this news, waiting read of this. This has a very this book is a very interesting in the sense that it gives us a factual uh, and clean bit by bit um, what I should say, not only reportage, but an immediate explanation of how narratives which have been constructed, or the viewpoints which have been generated or spoken of, they have latent or underlying loopholes, which explains the hidden part of the story, the unsaid part of the story. So, even though narratives which are deliberate from the point of view of nations, and which appear to be objective, or which are presented as being objective as much as they can be, but there are latent biases, interests, or what I should say, designs, goals, or hidden assumptions of the people, or objectives which narratives seem to propound. So the aim of the book is trying to decipher the hidden part of that story, which is known in people know these things also intuitively, but the good part of the book is he has tried to give a factual analysis bit by bit of trying to get to the thread. What are the underlying latent in the act of omission and commission of things, what is which is omitted as a deliberate part of strategy, or maybe unconscious prejudices of nations to only give a certain they air a certain part of the story. So to quote him, so what I'll try to do in this, in the general summary of this book, is I'll just quote some selective sentences and maybe expand on them, or maybe give my own viewpoint, or expand those very on those very observations, and maybe sometimes slightly differ or disagree, or give my own point of view. So in the, for example, the way he says, for example, narratives of superiority, power, and wealth couched in persistent innuendo and attitudes must go. So, and this is not for domination alone, it is to prevent itself from being dominated as well. So maybe the main intention of what he wants to say is that the inevitability of trying to present your narrative as a nation, even understanding a narrative is inevitable, in a sense that unless and until you understand how nations construct their own narratives, will be drowned, stampeded, or washed off, or so it's a point of survival of a nation, how we can construct its own narrative if it has to survive in the 21st century. So in that process, for example, the first part of it is that how we can get our story right. Story right in the sense, for example, the first, how we try to define narrative. What he says in his own words, narratives are not truth. Rather, they nudge you to understand the truth in a particular way. They are never neutral or innocent. They are always strategic. Narratives are about perceptions of events and goals. The most important requisite of narrative is to be successfully sold is a receptive audience. So So in a sense, what he's trying to say that narratives not ought not to be misconstrued with the truth content of the things. So narratives per se are made to nudge you in a certain direction, and which are not value neutral. They are expositely or extrovertly, they expositedly, what I should give angle or give spin in a certain way, how you want to view things, how you want others to pursue your own self, or how you want yourself to be perceived in your own eyes and in the eyes of the rest of the world. And in that sense, primarily what he is talking of, for example, in the strategic sense of in the battle of narratives, that the superiority, how we can you prove that your narrative is superior in the balance of or in the contestation of the narratives. And because narratives can have, just like in a novel, there's a plot, there can be subplots, there can be narratives, there are sub narratives. It's basically how you want to weave a tapestry or a story around a narrative which should seem plausible to the target audience or the target people you want to address to the world at large. So the propaganda value of the narrative is not to be discounted off, but the essential part of narrative is that you have to mix the truth content of the narrative in a manner which will be orderly and composite. And the subtler the narrative, the subtler is your way of presenting yourself, and the guarantee of success in the larger sense of the word. So what he to supplement it is that the view, what he says, for example, in the U.S. and Western domination over the rest of the world is not the result of economic, technological, and military might. Constructing a favorable narrative is the fourth leg of the table. Not only maybe narrative, maybe it's also called soft power, or whatever you want to use the term in that sense. In the Kiplean sense, the white man's burden to Christianize or educate the rest of the world. Why should rest of the world take this narrative? So, so in the mind games which nations play with each other, so the idea of national interest is sometimes also portrayed as enlightened self-interest, which might be brazen or aggressive selfishness of nations to promote their own interests, but the apparent presentation has been in the other direction. So in that he quotes a lot of scholars from Joseph Nye and a lot of people. So how we can do it? So what the important message, what he says, for example, he says that there must be a single message that should be going on. This does not mean a controlled media, but a media that thinks nationally even when it acts internationally. The West has the ability today, so do the Russians and Chinese. China has not only understood this but has taken precautions as well. It has means and capability to firewall itself against the Western origin social media like Twitter. It has replaced Google with his homegrown Baidu. So even though you can say the start of the book, the way of addressing or so in principle, the scope of the book here somewhere in the start, he says he's not trying to give whether narratives are right or wrong in that ideological sense of the word, but he's trying to give a factual analysis of how narratives are constructed and how their influence or effect is on the rest of the world. So primarily he is talking from the point of view of how Western American narrative about things has dominated the rest of the world. with the exceptions being how the Chinese or maybe Russians have in some successfully somehow countered that unidirectional or one-way part of the accepting the narrative in a certain way about the events which are there in the international affairs in the recent past. And maybe the repository has been, according to author, largely he has taken the Western American historiography, and the resources have been from there. So, for example, the way he says, for example, when he talks of America, he talks of that the truth about America, for example, when you talk of national security, foreign policy, so how it is, how narratives are controlled or conveyed, for example, in case of, for example, US or America. Foreign policy and national security, at least, are understood by the common person, is instead handled by an elite, by dynasty, old school ties, Ivy League networks, and by admirals and generals. The comfort level is high regardless of political leanings. Over time, that American power structure has been built on twin pillars of massively powerful think tank and represents the wealthy and powerful Christian groups. So it's known. So what he wants to say that the American narrative, it's not as if the nation has come to the consensus once they are going to decide regarding their foreign policy matters, which is seen as if there is some consensus. So it's a small elite, whether it's a Council of Foreign Relations or the American power elite, which normally maybe a trilateral commission. These are very closed door. Closed door, or I would say consensus of elites, which may be academicians, which may be generals, which may be clergy, which may be politicians, which may be rich people, who impose a certain viewpoint to the American public at large, and the way they also translate or transform or import it to the rest of the world. So the underlying the way it's being perceived in the rest of the world, the consensus is that it's like democratic, or it's but when behind the veneer of what it looks, it's not the consensus of an elite, tiny minority elite, how they want the rest of the world to see themselves, or the decisions which are taken. For example, whether it's, for example, founders, Rockefeller, Brzezinski, Greenspan, Walker, Kissinger, for example, these are some selected few, uh, and how they impose. And it's not only this thing. The media industry of, for example, Hollywood as such, has been very much instrumental in just promoting or conveying a narrative in a certain direction or viewpoint. So the relationship of agencies, CIA and Hollywood, it's been well documented, and how the movies have been censored, or there has been active collaboration of artists or in movies or famous movies, Oscar movies, to give a certain spin to the narrative regarding this, whether Vietnam or Afghanistan, the sort of movies that have been constructed. So it's a very subtle art of how the American agencies have, in a very subtle way, tried to manufacture. It's not only manufacture a spin, or agencies have used them. And again, in the construction of narratives, how the role of US army and how the excesses they have committed, they have been in a very sophisticated way modeled out. Now, one important things is that what he talks of, this sentence, for example, he says that big power interests were changeable according to needs. Somersaults with spectacular ease are an art in global politics. Means how you can make U-turns to serve your interests and change your people who were yesterday's friends. You can change them into foes and vice versa. And this is, for example, what she says. At times, this relationship is adversarial. There are happy times when they praise one another and even support each other for their individual games. The essential point is that intelligence agencies need media, and media needs agencies. Agencies manipulate parliament and the public and use the media to further their cause or create perceptions in which could be defined as a larger national interest. As an example of this was Iraq war or in global war on terror. So maybe the role of media of promoting the national policies of war, US interventionism. So the active participation of media is also very much. Maybe the Chomskyan dictum of the manufacture of consent, how that consent is achieved at, and the underlying the consensus are not supposedly national interests. They may be selfish or what I should say, imperial or conglomeration of maybe a lot of not solely so holy or nice or sacred things they are getting together for advancement of certain hidden or desire of individuals, nations, and behind that there are some moves which are maybe ulterior or which may not seem that sacred. So this is known by and large, but the way he has tried to give examples galore, they to prove these points is interesting. And for that, for what he says, the narratives do not just happen. It takes time, cohesive, steadfast performance, and huge amount of subtlety to distinguish between balanced, high decibel propaganda and gentle persuasion. So the persuasive, maybe persuasive way of presenting your narrative is more subtler or more effective than being balanced and propagandist. Now, what I want to say is that the notion profit in the war in the name of peace, how the American the has talked of for as the world must deal with military, industrial, intelligence, technology, complex work in tandem with US. The hidden narrative will not change. There will be wars to make more wars. So the notion of military industrial complex, or you can use the notion of scientific industrial technological military complex, the full circle of it, where one feeds on other. Maybe you need market, you need technology, the technology needs markets, market needs war needs ideology. So you somehow, in the capitalistic sense of the word, this is a full blown circle. But maybe one thing he has not missed is that when we are going to military, industrial, scientific, technological complex, the underlying ideological justification to advance this loop, uh, should that ideology be contested, or should it be taken from as a truth value, as a understanding of how society should evolve in future also? Are there creative ways by which we can go for industry, scientific, industrial, technological, and military complex? We can bypass that military part of it. So, as humans, our need to just the insecurity of survival which was part of how civilization has evolved. Can there be an alternate route through this scientific, industrial, military, technological complex? Can there be alternate ideology where the circle cannot be just the end part of it is not the war of it, the creation of technologies for market? So the loop, the loopiness of this thing, can some of it be broken with some alternate ideology? So, for example, in a very interesting way, he has shown that how the notion of war industry, where oil, wealth, and power are somehow they are getting together, and how the U.S. media and other things they are coming together to attain this thing. Now comes the fact that whether this thing which I was saying, that is there a justification for this brazenly uh, brazen expounding of U.S. interest in foreign policy or in other matters of controlling or presenting a narrative? Is it born out of uh, is it an empire design, or it's a reluctant imperialist? So because for example, here what he says, they do have immense confidence in their own capabilities to the point of being narcissists with the grandiose ideas about themselves. They like to think that all would be well in the world if the countries became American clones, and that may want to be so but do not know how to. So maybe the thing that the new, so how, for example, historian, he has quoted historian Neil Ferguson, where he says US as an empire may not have been entirely bad, described it as an unconscious empire with its self-conscious imperialism as one of the better alternatives. US as a reluctant imperialist. So, and to further it, for example, but the argument is often given that if US is 6% of the population, it controls 53% of the resources. So if the other countries follow US as their model, is it sustainable or not? So US way of the confidence of US of globally extending their reach, whether by military interventionism or by power structure or by ambition or by goal in terms of enterprises, it is a necessity for some, or it is an ideology. If the rest of the world will emulate it, is it sustainable or not? These are open questions. For example, but one thing is that, for example, the richer are and poor, everyone thinks God is on their side. God is on everybody's side, and in the last analysis, on the side that plenty of money and large armies. Both statements are correct. Americans are convinced that this applies mostly to them. So large. So, but maybe he has given some sentences or words where maybe Indian way or Eastern way has an alternative to offer. So maybe in chapter 7 he talks of immigration, nationalism, and Islam. So in that sense, what he's trying to say is that the way we know in the history, for example, Suharto was charged with bringing back the IMF and World Bank to Indonesia after Sukarno had overthrown them out previously. Nobody reported this, and that was a triumph of Western propaganda. So, if 1.5 million people died and it was not reported, so this omission part of it in the rest of the world was part of his. He claims that it's a success, or maybe you have to balance it in the times of Cold War also. Propaganda of two ideologies, maybe which won and which lost. Maybe Americans maybe have been more sophisticated in trying to get their story to the rest of the world in a more sophisticated part, and Russians and might have been clumsier in propagating. But somewhere he's also talking of the Russian and the Chinese have also been complicit, the way Stalin and Mao have been complicit in a lot of suffering. But it was also not reported in that sense. So this is a good part of it. What he's saying that in the end, Europe's enemy is not Islam or even radical Islam. For Europe's enemy is passivity, softness, and towards tyranny and reflexive manipulation to appease. One crucial question there remains profound uncertainty: is Islam compatible with democracy? So, if Islam is to coexist with democracy, whether in Middle East, South Asia, Europe, or US, then Muslims, like millions of Jews and Christians before them, must discover more liberal ways of interpreting the faith. So these are the things like the problems of immigration in recent times and the problems associated with it. Maybe Europe is burdened with their guilty past and in the process of accommodating new people, immigration. But that immigrant population is not maybe getting assimilated to the cultural ethos of Europe. So these problems ad nauseum, they create new problems for both host and the people who are migrating to these countries. And according to the author, maybe so the appeasement is not the right thing to do. But you have to be also, maybe I'll slightly disagree with this, is that in the process of trying to come to terms with each other, one should also, there can be there are certain some unresolved issues which are there. So now I come to maybe Russia. So Russian reassertion, he has talked very much how Kremlin and the role of Putin in trying to use technology, military relations, Cold War, and a lot of Cold War resources. So how the Russians have been very much very adept in trying to put their part of a narrative to the rest of the world, somehow to change the American unilateralism in a certain way. For example, in the world of technology getting smarter by day and by an acute competition in mass, a world of nations with global ambitions, mutual suspicion, and competitive goals, then one who makes the first move may end up scoring the first goal. Nations that do not have their own capabilities will become dependent on friendly resources to provide them with the means to do. Subservient is inbuilt into that. So, how Russia has been successful in trying to, what I should say, create a narrative or leverage their resources to contest or American dominance in creating holes into the American unilateral dominance of narratives is very interesting. It's significant how Russia has done it in these last 10-20 years. And regarding Chinese, is that the peaceful rise narrative, how China has convinced itself and the rest of the world that the peaceful rise of China is 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 not part of is part of it's good for itself, it's good for the rest of the world, and they have been very consciously trying to do it over the years of how to use Chinese language and Chinese resources of economically, trying to just present a case image out to the world that they have not themselves invested so much in the military as in the softer resources, and peaceful and responsible rise of China is good for their world and for and the world at large, and it is maybe slowly alternative to the American America is a superpower, but maybe the recent this coronavirus thing, how it has somehow dented this image, and how China can be successful or partially successful in assuaging the world concerns is also one of the things that is talked well. This is an interesting part of it, the corporate dreams, how corporate dreams or how corporate culture where technology, finance, stock markets. So what he says, the latest technology in many spheres is housed in the West. The financial control is exercised by 3 or 4 institutions in the West. Prices of raw materials are fixed in stock markets in New York and London. If added to this, even the food that is being grown and consumed is determined by one part of the world, the result would possibly be absolute subservience. So, so at the end, what I'm trying to say is that he's also talking of how technology, whether Microsoft, whether Google, whether are all located in the western part of the world. China and Russia have been leveraged their resources in a better way to contest the western part of the narrative, and how how he would want to that India should also follow the league in that same sense of the word. And the way the policy of divide and rule was there in previous years, how Indians should just understand through the thick and thin of these things, if they at all have to just contribute something into the 21st century. One important thing is interesting thing somewhere he talks is that maybe Afghan war or this war Iraq, how the people who died in 9/11, if 3,000 people died in 9/11, but maybe more than 20,000 people are died subsequently in Afghanistan. So why is it that people talk of first story, not the other story? And that's his also, maybe he is saying that it also did not stand in subsequent years. So narratives have to be sound enough, so if they have to sustain for long. So what I would rather say is that this how nations construct narratives is a very it's in a way how the factual part of it, how he has construed a narrative behind a narrative, and whether he is converted of replicating the narrative in the true sense of the word, whether it's an inevitable evil of if the way we construct narrative, good or bad, right or wrong, fair or foul, somehow it is being justified globally. Uh, so if we want, if we have to survive, so if it's a necessary evil of for creating a narrative, he is not Vikram Sood is not giving us whether uh, it's an end in itself or not. But what some in a subtle way, he's also trying to give us an alternate way that narratives are not necessarily supposed to be moral. So if it's pragmatic or it's a necessary evil that nations should learn to craft a narrative, if at all they have to be just survive in the flux of events, if at all they have to make a mark, if at all they have not to be driven by narratives which don't exist, which don't come from their soil, which is not from within, which is imposed from above, from without. What so they have to have a view of narrative, how they will construct narratives in the larger sense of the word. For example, if I quote what he is saying, if a major power with global interests wishes to retain its supremacy or prevent alternative centers of power from emerging, it naturally must be able to tell its own story. Tell it first, tell it well, and repeatedly, in different ways and at different times. All governments lie, bar none, as and when it suits them. The important aspect is to lie first. The principle is be in with your story first, because any other story thereafter is only fiction. So maybe this is the sum and bonum of what he is trying to say. So, but that he has not talked in the sense whether the Indian civilizational ethos, whether the if he wants to impose this thing, it's a modern Western Darwinian aggressive survival of the fittest Malthusian analysis. So he whether he can import these, how he can import that in the Indian civilizational ethos. So how it is going to, he is going to, so whether there are inherent conditions, contradictions in this narrative or not, or even if they are, how we can smoothen out those very contradictions or angularities of trying to synchronize these not supposedly polar opposites, but there can be some things in the 21st century. And in the process, he wants that if the West has to come, so I'll end it what he says. He says that we need to manage our narrative to control our destiny. So to control our destiny, that we have to manage our own narrative, rather than what in the process of creating your own, how the other world thinks about you should be how you think about yourself. It's not that if how the world thinks or the rest of the world thinks about you and you think in the same sense, that you have lost the plot. But the point is that even if to construct your own narrative, the underlying ideological underpinnings, who you are, uh, and in some sense, as a part in the book, in the last chapter, he has tried to show that how we can manage the past, in past and present, in a manner which will get synchronized, which gets synchronized, and how we can manage those contradictions in presenting an idea of an India, which is perceptive of knowledge, and but which is also sensitive to the value system. and how the rest of the world has tried to give the picture of a lopsided picture of India, of, which may not be true. There are a lot of things which I missed, but I'll just end at this point that it's an interesting read, this book. So I'll end it by saying what again that we need to manage our narrative to control our destiny. So that's a point I want to end.